Okay, last one. So I have information about g of x, and g of x is negative of f of x plus 3. So we'll say So g of negative 2 is equal to negative f of negative 2 plus 3. And what is f of negative 2? It's 19. Negative 19. So I'll have negative of negative 19 plus 3. So that's positive 19 plus 3, which is 22. So that goes here. And then g of negative 1 is going to be negative f of negative 1 plus 3. So that gives me f of negative 1 is negative 3. So that gives me positive 3 plus 3, which is 6. That goes here. And g of 0 is going to be negative f of 0 plus 3. So that's negative f of 0 is 1 plus 3, so that's 2. And g of 1 is going to be negative f of 1 plus 3, and f of 1 is negative 1. So that's 1 plus 3, which is 4. And then g of 2 is going to be negative f of 2 plus 3, which is negative, what is f of 2 is negative 3 plus 3. So that's positive 3 plus 3, which is 6. And then h of x is f of negative 1/2 x. So h of negative 2 is going to be equal to f of negative 1/2 of negative 2. Well, half of 2 is 1, and we have 2 negatives, so that's f of 1. So h of negative 2 is f of 1, and f of 1 is negative 1, so that's a negative 1 there. And then h of negative 1 is f of negative 1/2 of negative 1, which is f of 1/2, which we don't have information about that because that's not one of our inputs here that we have. So this is NA. There. And then h of 0 is f of negative 1/2 times 0, which is f of 0, which is 1. And then h of 1 is f of negative 1/2 times 1, which is f of negative 1/2, which is not one of my inputs that I have there for x, so this is NA. And then h of 2 is going to be f of negative 1/2 times 2, which is f of negative 1, and I do have that value, it's negative 3. Okay. For this one, I want the period, midline, and amplitude, and so if I look at this, I can find that the graph, it looks like, goes from 2 to 8, so halfway through that is 5 is the midline, so the midline is y equals 5. The amplitude is the distance from the midline to the either extreme. So the amplitude is 3 there. And the period is the distance from one minimum to another minimum, and I can see that that happens in 2 units. So this minimum to that minimum is 2 units, so the period is 2. For the next one, I want the period, midline, and amplitude. So one thing I might notice is that it looks like my max value happens to be 22, and my min value happens to be 10. That appears over and over. And so I can see that my y values go from 10 to 22. And so I know that 22 minus 10 is 12, so there's a distance of 12 between those. So 6 would be halfway, so that's 16 is halfway in between. So my midline is at y equals 16, and my amplitude is 6. That's the distance from the midline to either extreme. So my amplitude is 6, and then the period is going to be the distance between one minimum to the next minimum. So it looks like it goes from 4 to 20. So my period then is 16 because it's going to be 20 minus 4. So it goes, here's a minimum, here's a minimum. And so those x values go from 4 to 20. That's a distance of 16.